Hello and welcome to the Broadcast Newswrap. Yes, it's your shorthand guide to the week's biggest TV news stories, brought to you by the Broadcast editorial team. I'm Broadcast senior reporter Max Goldbart, and this week we have an interview with an extremely special guest, chewing gum creator and deliverer of 2018's blistering MacTaggart lecture, Michaela Coel. Michaela has been speaking with our reporter Desiree Ibekwe, and we'll have all the reaction from Des about this insightful interview that took place earlier this week. Elsewhere, what's that coming over the hill? Is it a streamer? Yes, it's a streamer. HBO Max launches in the US this week, and our insight editor Jesse Whittock is on hand to give you listeners even more insight than usual. All that, plus what we've been watching on this week's Broadcast Newswrap. Des, great to have you back on the pod. How are you this week?
Oh, I'm good. I'm warm. I've just been consistently warm, but yeah, I'm good.
Consistently warm is the order of the day. Jesse Whittock, you were podless last week. It was a week off the Jesse. How was your week without the pod?
I felt bereft. I felt sad, and needed to make an immediate return.
The big trio. Well, you were sorely missed, Jesse, and it's good to have you back. And later we'll be talking HBO Max. But first of all, Des, you interviewed Michaela Coel earlier this week. How did that go?
Yeah, no. So I interviewed Michaela Coel, who is the brains behind Chewing Gum, and now I May Destroy You, which is a BBC HBO co-pro. And yeah, we spoke about a bunch of things. We spoke about her MacTaggart 2 years ago, the development of the show, which is based on very sensitive personal experience. And yeah, no, it was great. She was great.
Great. Well, we're going to go to a little clip of that interview and we'll be back shortly. A disclaimer, the audio quality of the interview is slightly crackly.
Yeah, thank you so much for hopping on this call. So kind of getting onto the show, it's a deeply sensitive topic, and I was wondering about the development process for the project.
Yes, I had a personal experience, as you may know already. My drink was spiked and I was sexually assaulted by a stranger. And I had therapy for a long time. I still check in with my therapist now. But with everything that I write, there is some sort of reality involved that I take inspiration from. And it was and is such a huge part of my life, of my narrative, that it felt I had the conviction to do it. There wasn't really a decision to write. It was a conviction that grew from within me before I was aware. I didn't control it. I was working on Black Earth Rising and went to meet peers about it. And I just spoke to him for an hour, and he wrote to me the next day saying, we would like you to do this. You don't need to write a treatment. You don't need to write a pilot. We want you to remain true to your voice. Would you like to do it with us? And this was really, for me, a dream. And not, they gave me creative freedom and control, but also questioned me through every draft. And it's the same with Phil at Val. They asked me what I meant. And also I spoke with other people who had experiences like mine, and realized how common this was, of not being sure whether you consented to something was in our modern day culture. It probably existed long before I was born too. I'm very appreciative of the fact that I was given full creative control, but also felt very guided, very questioned. They asked me so many questions when they weren't clear on what I was trying to communicate. And that was the process. It was a really beautiful process. And of course, the BBC has a certain amount of funding, but it wasn't really all that we needed to make the show that we wanted to make. So then we went to America. Maybe this was about 7 months into the process of writing, and pitched to HBO, to the wonderful Amy Gravitt. And what I liked was she'd read the draft and had a very deep understanding of the script, and it blew my mind how much she understood without me needing to converse about it. So it felt like the right place. She was really attuned to what I was trying to do.
Yeah, and I think it's incredibly powerful that you're fronting it as well as writing it. So I wonder what that's like, working through that and being at the forefront, because it's one thing to write it, it's another thing to be in it. Like, how did you look after yourself and looking after your mental health?
Therapy is awesome. You know, I have a fantastic therapist, and also on top of that, when we began to, in fact, before we began to shoot, Phil Clark, who is very amazing, said, we're going to get a therapist to be on standby the whole time. So I checked in with Lou a lot. He was the therapist who was on standby for the show. Medication, yoga, exercise is so helpful. Taking a train to Kent and spending a couple of days in a cheap Airbnb that a couple have built in their back garden. Some people build like little cabins in their garden. These things, I think, were crucial to ensuring that I remained okay whilst we shot. Also, sleep. I was always determined to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Sometimes the schedule was very full, and there was no way that I could, but those were very rare occasions.
What was it like to work with HBO?
This is the first time I have worked with Americans. Black Mirror, I was working with Charlie Brooker. That's all I knew. We shot it here. We went to Lanzarote, Spain. You don't really feel the presence of this streaming service kind of thing. I don't know anything about Netflix. I could have done this show with them, and I decided not to because I wanted to retain some of my rights. So HBO enabled me to do that, which is why, it's been a great experience.
Kind of going to your MacTaggart, it really struck a chord in terms of the treatment of misfits, the way that the industry lauds them, but kind of keeps their distance at the same time.
Yeah.
I wonder whether you think there's been progress on that in the British television industry. Do you think there are more misfits? Are they treated better?
At the time that I wrote that lecture, because it was my challenge, it meant I was swapping contracts with people. I was asking questions to gather data. Now, I obviously haven't been doing that because I've been working on my show. So it's very hard to know how things have progressed. What I do know is that there is at least one company, and that's Desiree Ibekwe, that's going to disassociate from Misfits while platforming them. They were so mindful of my well-being, and I just want other production companies to look at them and see how it's supposed to be done. That's how it's supposed to be done. I've been empowered, and I don't know whether this is happening. I don't know. I'm curious about how the experience of people from the LGBTQ community, people of color, I'm really curious about how their experiences have gone. I'm curious as to whether they have even had opportunities in order to experience good or bad things about this industry. I don't know, and I am so curious. I don't know.
Going back to the show, like, what do you want the impact to be? Like, what do you want people to take away from it?
It's so many things, and also, like, is it anything? Part of my heart, which I don't engage with a lot because my expectations become high, are that people who have had experiences that are traumatic watch this and somehow feel like they're not alone, that it inspires people, that it sows a seed. But I try to not engage with that part of myself because it's so hopeful. It's like this hopeful part of me. And then the other part of me says, Michaela, you're doing your job. Once that thing has TX'd and it's out, your job is done. And it's time to move on. Time to have a break. We are working away in post-production right now. And when it's done, it's done. It's out in the world. And there isn't much I can do. At the same time, I do hope that it inspires thought and that it might stir something inside of us, inside of the individual whilst they watch, that it calls us to look inside, to look inward and explore our internal selves and how we're doing.
Thank you so much for chatting with me. I know you're very busy.
Des, that was fantastic, and I felt like you touched on a range of topics there. First of all, what did you think of Michaela as a person?
Great. I mean, she's, she doesn't mince her words. I think is pretty, refreshing to hear someone, have an opinion and say it like without concern. I mean, she raises valid points, so I think it's neither here nor there. I mean, like, she's kind of inspirational. I wish I could be that candid, but alas. Yeah, no, she's great.
She is quite the inspiration. Would you say? I mean, as I said, we covered quite a range in that clip. Were there some key takeaways maybe from the interview that we may not have heard?
This may have come across, but I think she's really taken this project to look after herself. So I don't know if it's not in the clip, but she talks about going to a cabin in Kent or and taking walks in the forest. I mean, she's really taken the time to look after herself, which is obviously necessary. But yeah, no, she seems like someone that's very at one, very zen, and does yoga, which is again inspirational. See, it's all coming together. She's a very inspirational person, just generally.
Inspirational is the name of the game this week. The show, I've seen the odd clip of I May Destroy You, which is shortly going to be on BBC One, and there's obviously a sort of self-autobiographical nature to it. Do you think it's going to have a bit of an impact beyond? I imagine it'll rate quite well, and I imagine it'll be quite well received. Do you think it will go beyond that in terms of maybe impacting future telly or having a sort of internal impact on the sector almost?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's pretty heavy stuff, but it's authored by a Black woman talking about her own experiences of sexual assault. So I think that's pretty radical in and of itself. But she, as she said in the clip, had a lot of creative control, and I think it's important for when we have people of color or misfits, as she said, no MacTaggart, having an actual stake in the industry rather than superficial credits. So I think, yeah, beyond just the subject matter, I think her role in that show is going to have quite an impact for people coming up behind her.
Des, did Michaela feel that the MacTaggart, which was so powerful in 2018, does she feel that speech has had the impact that she wanted it to have? Did she sort of approach or get onto that topic?
She said that she would be interested to see what has happened. I think she pitched this show in 2018, and it was a labor of love. There was a lot going on, so I think she hasn't had time to take another broad sweep of the industry and see what's happening. But I think she feels like her own experience with Various Artists Limited, who's the producers of the show, they've empowered her. They made her feel safe and comfortable. So for her, I think the jury's still out. She's curious to know. She's said that she would want to find out. So I think we'll have to wait and see what her take is on the current state of the industry.
Yeah, it did sound like that what she did briefly touch upon about it in the clip did sound a little bit like maybe the jury's still out. I was having a little think back to that MacTaggart, which is almost 2 years ago now. We had Dorothy Byrne in between with a similarly kind of blistering broadside, you might call it. But I was looking back and there was some great quotes. Coel said that broadcasters, production companies and streaming services have been scrabbling for misfits like kids in a playground scrabbling for sweets, not sure of the taste, just aware they might be very profitable. Which I thought was an absolutely amazing quote. She also said, "Why are we platforming misfits, heralding them as newly rich successes whilst they balance on creaking ladders?"
Quite intense stuff, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's really
impactful.
putting the industry under a spotlight, and I think that's what Michaela's been really good at doing, is shining a light on those areas where TV really should have made more progress and hasn't done, and hopefully she is one of the vanguards of a new generation of creators who will actually change things. And certainly with the new show, it seems like she's going some way to doing that, and you hope that there are more like her out there. But it's always good to hear from someone like that, a sort of a unique voice in the industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember being very impressed by her. So I think around that time she'd launched her own indie actually, which was just kind of like a production vehicle, and they're co-producing on I May Destroy You, right? And she seemed to have a really good idea of how to navigate the industry beyond just being the talent, and that came out, and it seems like there'll be more of that to come. I wonder if I've been thinking a bit as well about the impact of coronavirus on diversity improvements. Did she touch on that, or if not, what do you reckon, Des? Do you think Corona is gonna slow things down in diversity and inclusion gains, or possibly speed things up?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to the kind of chief exec of the CDN a couple of weeks ago now, maybe 2 months. Time is very weird at the moment.
It really
But
is.
she did say that, you know, there's obviously concern that, you know, during COVID, like during the pandemic, during lockdown programming, that they're not going to access those people who are more diverse and reach for the usual suspects. I mean, again, after that, I've spoken to a number of people who are BAME or, you know, are in the industry, and it just feels like there's been a bit of a stop on it at the moment. And obviously, you know, the industry is dealing with existential questions, but really, you know, diversity, a lot of people are saying that diversity should be so baked into the way that people are working that it shouldn't be a consideration to pause and restart when you know, things get back to normal. So there's obviously a risk. People at Channel 4 are still ring fencing money for, you know, small BAME and regional indies. So we'll have to wait and see, but it's just very disappointing for certain people that is something that's an add-on rather than something that's kind of imbued and baked into the way that we work.
Yeah, the general response is almost a little bit worrying. And also often this stuff costs money, doesn't it? And broadcasters and indies have less to spend. So it's, as you identified, if it's considered an add-on, add-ons are currently the things that are being removed at the moment. So therefore you do worry. Today is the 28th of May, and tomorrow we'll be publishing both Des's interview with Michaela Coel and my interview with June Sarpong, who's the new head of creative diversity for the BBC. And she took a more positive view, thinking that as coronavirus sort of speeds up the way in which we work as an industry, and we make quick gains in certain areas, such as working from home, for instance, we're all realizing that working from home is eminently possible. Areas in the diversity space could also improve at a faster rate, she thinks. So there are clearly some conflicting views out there.
Yeah, and there is that argument that I've heard several times, speaking to a producer from a BAME background last week, who was talking about the fact that her indie is a regional company, small regional company, and that her take on things was the coronavirus lockdown has in effect leveled the playing field slightly, because everyone's sort of doing the same things, and you know, the whole kind of London media set idea or group has obviously kind of ceased to be for the time being. There's that old adage that people talk about, you know, the producer bumping into the commissioner on the third floor of the BBC, you know, as they wait for the lifts, and then doing that sort of elevator pitch, as they call them, getting shows away that way. There's a sense that that's probably going to go away a little bit, and hopefully the sort of culture behind that will go away to an extent and level the playing field. There's clearly lots of different takes on how we're going here, and there's going to be a lot more to investigate as we go forwards.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that as well. Like, obviously, there's been talk more generally about what COVID's going to change, but I think it needs to be on some level like an active decision on the industry's part. I think, you know, I've spoken to people that are like, great that everyone's saying things are going to change, but actually, how do you put things in place to make sure that actually happens? Because it's very easy to be like, oh, you know, like no one, you know, people are going to be on more Zoom calls, but if you don't hold people to account and have codified rules or ways of working, then there's definitely a risk that that's going to fall by the wayside, and we just start having Pret lunches and stuff. I don't know.
Nothing wrong with a Pret lunch.
There's everything wrong with a Pret lunch.
Des, good stuff. Well, I'm certainly looking forward to reading your interview. That is available now on www.broadcastnow.co.uk. Michaela's new BBC One series, I May Destroy You, is co-produced with HBO, and the US powerhouse of Game of Thrones fame launched its streamer, HBO Max, this week. Jesse Whittock, our insight editor, is here to guide us through it. So Jesse, HBO Max is launching alongside a string of other really big budgeted services. What the hell can it do to stand out?
So a little bit of context on the HBO Max service itself. So it's a US only service for the time being. The folk behind it, so Warner Media, owned by telecoms giant AT&T over there, have talked about taking it international at a later date, but I'll get a bit more onto that in a couple of minutes. But effectively what this service is the kind of amalgamation of all of those brands that sat together within the old Warner group. So that's HBO, the Turner channels, and Warner Brothers effectively. And for Warner Media, as the company is now, this is a massive play akin to the play that Disney have taken with Disney Plus. So they're really, staking the furniture and staking the house on this being a success. Obviously in the US, the HBO cable channel is kind of absolutely aligned with that sort of premium programming. It's known for shows like The Wire, The Sopranos, 6 Feet Under, True Detective, some of those absolute cultural milestone TV shows. But HBO Max represents a sort of different step for the business. After AT&T took over Warner, there was a kind of cultural war broke out to an extent. So the old guard HBO guys like Richard Plepler, who was the former CEO, were very keen to protect the HBO brand and what it represents, that kind of high-end documentary, high-end drama, a bit of premium sport, that sort of brand. Whereas the guy who sort of took over Warner Media, who is now actually the CEO of AT&T, a man called John Stankey, he famously went into a town hall meeting with the company and effectively said, you guys are way too slow and you need to produce a lot more stuff, which is kind of the antithesis of the HBO model, which is carefully created and curated programming made by sort of premium creators, right? So you've got this massive new service, which effectively, obviously, the parent company has won out and they're launching this service. They've got all sorts of programs on it, and it will be fascinating, Max, to see how this fits into the kind of emerging ecosystem of SVOD services.
Yeah, it does sound to me like a lot is being staked on this service. So a year or two down the line, what is termed as a success? Maybe in terms of subs, maybe in terms of quality of original programming. What do you think makes this a success?
Well, it's really hard to say because you've seen these ultra successes like Netflix, which just keeps adding on subscribers quarter after quarter, hit record quarters early again this year. Disney Plus has already reached 50 million subs plus. That's obviously an international service, but that's doing really well. It's been really well received. Even Amazon Prime's doing, holding very firm. We had a story on Broadcast this week about how in the UK, Amazon is the main beneficiary of the trend for people to take more than one SVOD service. So Amazon is still growing. So you've got all these really good competing services with NBC's Peacock set to launch in July, I believe. So it's really difficult to say. I mean, one thing that HBO has to deal with is it's really expensive, this service. It's $14.99 a month. That's in dollars, which effectively there's a number of reasons for that. I think that first of all is that they're trying to say by that number how good the service is, how many hours they have. I think it's 10,000 hours at launch, loads of Warner movies. They've got the entire Friends catalogue, South Park's on there. Unexpectedly, they launched with the Harry Potter movies. So Warner had licensed the Harry Potter movies to NBC a few years back, and it was expected that those movies would launch on Peacock. Don't know the ins and outs of that deal, but effectively the service launched yesterday with Harry Potter there. So that's a massive draw again. And I think that they're trying to say that, this product is a standout in the market because of what we offer. There are also sort of contractual things in terms of the cable market and the cable providers in the US. I won't get into that. It's kind of a bit dull and a bit boring. And they also don't want to undercut the HBO product, which is a premium cable channel over there. So it's expensive. So there's all those reasons for that. But I mean, it makes it difficult to quantify what a success is. Like, is 10 million paying a higher price better than 50 million paying a cheaper price but growing faster? It's really hard to say, but it's a fascinating play by the Warner Media Group.
It's an interesting setting the price at such a high price point, and you're right. I think there are some ins and outs, aren't there, to do with cable, but also it does seem to, on a wider basis, kind of reflect HBO as that premium service, and maybe, as you said, 10 million to 15 million subs is ample when you're charging quite a bit and when you want to provide real quality to the people that are using your service. And what do you think? What do you think of the impact of coronavirus here? I always feel like we have to ask this question. We've got Quibi on the one hand, which has been claims to have been so hard hit by coronavirus, as that's hit its main business play. Got Disney Plus on the other hand, going great guns, picking up subs here, there, and everywhere as people are stuck indoors. So will HBO Max maybe fit somewhere in between that?
So Bob Greenblatt, who is running the HBO Max service, he's not old. That's very unfair. He is a veteran US programmer. Used to run NBC very successfully. He's worked for most of the big studios and knows network TV sort of inside out. He talked about the fact that during lockdown, and I don't think he's the only person to have said something similar to this, there won't be too much of a problem because they're relatively stocked in terms of their originals. They've got lots of stuff. They've got loads of library content, and they're not too worried in the short term. But he did an interview this week, I think it was with CNN, which would make sense because that's another Warner owned business, in which he said they are anticipating a shortfall of new original stuff sort of towards the end of this year, early 2021. And that's where he's a bit more concerned, because obviously there is no production happening at the moment. You would think at this stage they would be looking to commission a whole slate of new shows to populate that sort of time period. They're not going to be able to at the moment, so it'll be interesting. I mean, what they have done, which is different to something like Disney Plus, is they've been really acquisitive. They bought lots of titles, so they're launching with British shows like Doctor Who, bought Luther, things like there's a whole bunch of shows that they've got, and they are looking for more. Greenblatt was actually saying in this interview that he's happy to buy library shows because they're really good and they're helpful, and so that gives distributors an opportunity to talk to them. So that just shows the sort of level that they're willing to go to stock up in areas that they need. But I think like everyone else, it's going to be sort of 6 months down the line from here, there will be a problem.
What about international expansion? Are we to expect HBO Max in the UK anytime soon?
It's a weird one. Previously, the way HBO particularly would operate internationally was to partner with other premium services in local territories. So over here in the UK, as we know, Sky Atlantic has run the HBO originals for a number of years, since I want to say 2014 or 2015. That deal was re-upped last year, which was to an extent a surprise. You thought they might have pulled back on that and tried to implement the HBO Max service in the UK. But it doesn't look like we're going to get that anytime soon, certainly not until about 2022, 2023. And it looks like they are much more in with Sky, and they're happy with the way that Sky Atlantic's working. Similarly, last week, or certainly very recently, they re-upped with Foxtel over in Australia. So Foxtel are akin to Sky over in the UK, which is exactly the same sort of thing. They have kind of, HBO branded channels, or certainly HBO content blocks. And so you can see they are not being quite as aggressive as someone like Disney, who has launched all over the world very quickly. My guess is we won't see the HBO stuff on HBO Max in the UK for a long time. I also think that stuff might go on Peacock if Peacock launches here, as Peacock is owned by the same company that owns Sky, so there is a chance for that to happen. I think that would be a bit of a kick in the teeth for HBO, but there you go. That's one to watch.
So many complexities, but it's been really good to hear about it, Jesse. You are a well of knowledge on this stuff.
I'm glad to hear it. I've been doing it for long enough. I hope I have something to say.
And now on to everybody's favourite section, what we've been watching. Although each
Yay.
week we say it's everyone's favourite section each week, but we haven't polled our listeners yet. So
I think
if you keep
it's
saying
our
it-
favourite part, isn't it?
yeah, we just like to talk about TV. Des, what have you been watching?
I've been watching The Mindy Project, which is Mindy Kaling's sitcom from 8 years ago. I watched it first when I was 16, but I've rewatched it now and I get some of the jokes. So I'm like, it is very good. So I've been watching that on my parents' Sky Go because I'm a scrounger. And yeah, no, it's really funny. It's like very silly, very absurd. Doesn't take itself too seriously, though there's like glaring issues in every episode. But I'm like, politically, it doesn't matter. There's no time to be woke when you're watching Mindy Kaling. So yeah, no, that's what I've been making my way through for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's funny rewatching these things. Are there some jokes which they couldn't have got away with in 2020?
Absolutely not. Even at the top of the first episode, I was like, nope. Like, no, it's not okay. And also really weird things, like there's an appearance from Seth Rogen in a shirt that says Army on it, and he's a veteran, and I was like, I don't understand what's going on. It's just like so on the nose. Like it's been fun.
Excellent. And Jesse, you've been trawling through Amazon Prime Video.
I have, and I've been doing two things, Max. One, as you know, I've been trying to get through season 10 of the MasterChef Australia.
Keep going.
It's painful. There are 61 episodes in that series, and it's basically always on in the background. It seems to be. I don't think I've actually watched an episode properly, but it is a good show. Like when you sit down, but it's way too positive for a Brit like me, and it's there's just a lot. I mean, the episodes are really long. I feel sorry for the Australian TV public who have to, I think it's on every single night when it's on over there. So that has sort of been on. But mainly I've been watching this cop show. It's one of the older Amazon originals called Bosch, which is based on the Michael Connolly novels. They're bestsellers. They're sort of like trashy, Airport W.H. Smith sort of books. Trashy is probably the wrong word. They're well written, but they are very formulaic, and you could probably apply that to the series. It's got some of the best producers in America behind it. So you've got people like Eric Overmyer, who is one of the guys behind The Wire. In fact, one of the stars is Jamie Hector. He plays the sidekick. Jamie Hector's best known for playing Marlowe in The Wire. And those who've watched The Wire know that Marlowe is the biggest bastard who's probably ever been put on television. So you've got all these like funny little TV references that I enjoy. The main character's real name is Titus Welliver, which is brilliant as well. The show itself, bits of it are brilliant. Some of the dialogue is really hammy. It's really nicely shot. I recommend it if you want a sort of slightly nonsense watch. That's my takeaway.
Great stuff. Well, I think we could all do with a slightly nonsense watch at the moment. So that sounds fantastic. Bosch on Amazon Prime Video. And Des and Jesse, it's been a pleasure as ever. Thanks for joining me on this week's Broadcast Newswrap. Thank you for listening to this week's Broadcast Newswrap. I've been senior reporter Max Goldbart, and you've been listening to chewing gum creator Michaela Coel, broadcast reporter Desiree Ibekwe, and insight editor Jesse Whittock. You can check out the pod on Spotify and iTunes, or on our website via www.broadcastnow.co.uk.